February 26, 1991, southern Iraq. The ground is no longer desert in the way doctrine expects it to be. Days of unseasonal rain have turned hard-packed sand into thick clay, heavy enough to swallow tracks and rob engines of traction. For armored units trained on speed, maneuver, and massed formations, this kind of terrain is a silent adversary. During the ground phase of Operation Desert Storm, American armored columns are pushing aggressively north, exploiting the collapse of Iraqi command and control after weeks of sustained air attacks. Tempo matters. Units are ordered forward faster than maps and weather reports can reasonably account for. In one shallow wadi, a lone M1A1 Abrams slips off firm ground and settles into the mud. The tank does not roll dramatically or collide with anything. It simply loses momentum. 70 tons press downward, track spin, and the hull bottoms out. The turbine engine cuts to prevent damage. The Abrams is immobilized. On paper, this should be a gift to the Iraqi army. A single Western main battle tank, separated from its formation, unable to maneuver, with limited external visibility due to rain and smoke. Iraqi Republican Guard units in the sector are equipped with Soviet-designed T-72 tanks. These crews are not inexperienced. Many are veterans of the Iran-Iraq War, accustomed to armor combat under harsh conditions. Their doctrine emphasizes closing to decisive range and delivering massed fire. Against a stationary target, 3 tanks should be more than sufficient. But warfare does not happen on paper. It happens at the intersection of technology, training, doctrine, and perception. What Iraqi commanders see through optical sights and infrared searchlights is a darkened shape in the rain. What they do not see is equally important. They cannot see through smoke the way thermal imagers can. They cannot distinguish heat signatures through precipitation. And they cannot know, from a distance, whether the American crew inside that motionless Abrams is blind, panicked, or already preparing to fight. Inside the stranded tank, the crew is acutely aware of the danger. Abrams' doctrine accepts that mobility is critical, but it does not assume immobility equals defeat. The tank's fire control system, thermal imaging sight, stabilized gun, and composite armor are designed to fight while stationary if necessary. Power may be reduced, but the turret remains fully operational. Ammunition is loaded manually, faster and more flexibly than any auto-loading system. The Abrams is not fleeing. It is waiting. As Iraqi tanks maneuver closer, confident that they are approaching a helpless target, the engagement that follows will expose a reality the Iraqi armored forces have not yet confronted. This is not simply a contest of guns and steel. It is a clash between generations of armored warfare, between assumptions forged in earlier conflicts and systems designed to negate them entirely.
The Iraqi approach is shaped by doctrines developed in the 1970s, built around visual identification, numerical superiority, and closing the distance to guarantee penetration. In poor weather, those doctrines become even more rigid. Rain degrades optics. Smoke obscures silhouettes. Darkness collapses engagement ranges. Iraqi tank commanders compensate by moving closer, trusting that proximity will overcome uncertainty. Against most armored targets in their experience, that logic holds. The T-72 was designed to fight this kind of battle. Its 125mm smoothbore gun is lethal at short range. High-explosive anti-tank rounds are effective against older composite armor and devastating against steel. The autoloader maintains a consistent rate of fire without exhausting the crew. On training diagrams, a stationary enemy tank inside 500 meters is a solved problem. What Iraqi crews cannot account for is the Abrams way of seeing the battlefield. The M1A1 does not rely on reflected light or active infrared illumination. Its thermal imaging system detects differences in temperature, not shape or color. Rain cools the ground unevenly, engines burn hot, exhaust vents glow. To the American gunner, the Iraqi tanks announce themselves long before they are visible to the naked eye. The weather that conceals the Iraqi advance becomes a spotlight instead. Equally decisive is stabilization. The Abrams gun and sights are stabilized in 2 axes, allowing accurate fire even when the hull is unevenly sunk into mud. The tank may not be able to move forward or back, but its turret does not care. Traverse is powered hydraulically, smooth and fast, unconstrained by the terrain beneath the hull. This capability is not theoretical. It is drilled repeatedly in training scenarios precisely because U.S. doctrine assumes friction, malfunction, and bad ground will eventually occur. The first Iraqi shots are not reckless. They are deliberate. High explosive rounds are fired to test the target, to assess reaction, to confirm vulnerability. The expectation is immediate damage or secondary explosions. Instead, impacts produce noise, smoke, and little else. The Abrams armor absorbs and defeats the energy. There is no catastrophic kill, no fireball, no turret lift. The American crew feels the concussion inside the hull, checks systems, and reports green across the board. This moment matters more than any technical specification. In armored warfare, belief shapes decisions. When a crew expects a kill and does not get one, hesitation follows. Iraqi commanders assume a malfunction, a bad hit, or unusual luck. They switch ammunition, cycle auto-loaders, adjust aim. Second stretch. In contrast, the American crew does not reassess whether they should fight. That decision was already made. They transition immediately from survival to dominance. The Abrams fires with a kinetic penetrator designed to defeat precisely this class of armor. There is no dramatic explosion on impact, only physics doing its work at extreme velocity. The result is instantaneous and final. Within moments, numerical superiority evaporates, not because Iraqi tanks lack courage or firepower, but because their doctrine has no answer for a system that sees first, shoots first, and survives the return fire.
Once the first Iraqi tank is destroyed, the engagement shifts from planned action to forced reaction. This is where doctrinal weaknesses become lethal. Iraqi armored units are trained to fight as formations, with overlapping fields of fire and command guidance flowing down from platoon leaders. That structure assumes time to observe outcomes, issue corrections, and reorient. In this fight, there is no such time. Thermal optics and computerized fire control compressed decision cycles to seconds. The Abrams does not need to maneuver to dominate the engagement. It only needs to keep seeing. The surviving Iraqi crews attempt to reposition, instinctively trying to reach what doctrine identifies as vulnerable zones. The rear of the Abrams offers thinner armor, and Iraqi gunners know this. But movement in deep mud is slower than anticipated. Tracks slip, engines strain. What appears through rain-blurred optics as a shifting dark mass is already fully resolved in the Abrams gunner's sight as distinct heat signatures, labeled mentally, prioritized, and tracked. This is not individual brilliance. It is system design reinforcing doctrine. American armored doctrine emphasizes hunter-killer operations, where the commander searches for targets independently while the gunner remains locked on the current threat. Even while immobilized, this workflow remains intact. The commander identifies the next target through an independent thermal viewer. The gunner transitions instantly. The loader is already moving, manually feeding ammunition faster than an autoloader locked into a fixed carousel sequence. The Iraqi response fires continue, now using armor-piercing rounds intended to punch through frontal plates. The impacts are violent. Inside the Abrams, shockwaves travel through the hull. Instruments vibrate. Crews shout system checks by habit, not panic. The composite armor does what it was designed to do. Energy is disrupted, absorbed, and dispersed. Penetration does not occur. No spall clouds the fighting compartment. No fires break out. This imbalance creates a psychological collapse that mirrors the physical one. Iraqi commanders are confronting something their previous wars have not prepared them for: a target that does not respond to being hit. In earlier conflicts, damage feedback is immediate and visible. Smoke means a kill. Fire means success. Here, nothing looks different after impact. The Abrams does not withdraw. It does not fall silent. This turret continues to move with mechanical indifference. The remaining Iraqi tanks attempt rapid fire, hoping volume will compensate for precision. That hope dies quickly. One by one, thermal signatures disappear from the Abrams sight, replaced by expanding heat blooms and then static wreckage. What began as a confident ambush becomes a realization that proximity offers no safety when the enemy's system performance remains intact under stress. By the time firing stops, the rain is still falling. The Abrams remains stuck in the mud, unchanged in position, yet entirely victorious. The terrain has immobilized a platform, but it has not neutralized a combat system. After the firing ends, the engagement does not immediately resolve into clarity. Armored crews are trained to expect secondary threats, delayed detonations, and follow-on attacks. Inside the immobilized Abrams, the crew runs methodical checks. Hydraulics respond normally. The fire control system remains stable. Ammunition compartments are intact. What the tank has just endured is not a fluke of luck. It is a demonstration of design priorities made years earlier, long before this rain-soaked wadi existed on any map. The contrast between the two sides becomes clearer when examined beyond the moment of impact. Iraqi armor doctrine in 1991 is built around legacy assumptions inherited from Soviet theory. Tanks are expected to fight other tanks at relatively short distances, with armor thickness and gun caliber as decisive factors. Sensors are secondary. Fire control automation is limited. Survivability is often sacrificed for lower profile and reduced weight. Ammunition storage inside the crew compartment reflects that trade-off, increasing vulnerability once penetration occurs. The Abrams reflects a different philosophy. Its development assumed that armor would eventually be hit and designed the system to survive that reality. Composite armor arrays are arranged to defeat both shaped charges and kinetic penetrators. Ammunition is isolated behind armor doors, vented outward to protect the crew in the event of a cook-off. Optics and electronics are treated as core combat elements, not accessories. These choices add weight and cost, but they transform how the tank behaves under fire. Equally important is training doctrine. American crews spend extensive time fighting simulated battles where things go wrong. Mobility kills, partial systems failures, and degraded visibility are treated as expected conditions rather than catastrophic anomalies. The mindset inside the Abrams during this engagement reflects that preparation. The crew does not frame their situation as being trapped. They frame it as holding ground. That distinction shapes every decision that follows. For Iraqi forces, the encounter reinforces a harsh lesson already emerging across the theater. Numerical strength and bravery cannot compensate for sensor dominance and fire control speed. The Republican Guard units involved do not lack discipline or will. What they lack is a system capable of shortening the observe, decide, act cycle enough to survive against a technologically superior opponent. When recovery vehicles eventually arrive, the Abrams is pulled free without ceremony. There are no victory banners painted on the hull. No immediate understanding that this engagement will be discussed long after the war ends. But the implications are already written. A single immobilized platform has destroyed multiple attackers because it functioned as intended, even under worst-case conditions. The mud that should have turned it into a liability instead revealed what modern armored warfare had become. The wider consequences of encounters like this are not measured in destroyed vehicles alone. They ripple outward through after-action reports, intelligence assessments, and doctrinal revisions. During Desert Storm, repeated engagements confirm the same pattern. Iraqi forces are often able to detect American units only after contact has already been made, while U.S. crews routinely acquire targets at ranges beyond Iraqi effective fire. The engagement involving the immobilized Abrams is simply one of the clearest examples because it strips away maneuver and leaves technology exposed as the decisive factor. For Iraqi commanders, the realization is deeply unsettling. Their armored forces are not failing because of poor execution in this instance. They are failing because the foundational assumptions behind their equipment and training no longer match the battlefield. Thermal imaging negates concealment. Digital fire control negates fleeting opportunities. Composite armor negates first-hit expectations. Each individual advantage compounds the others, producing a gap that cannot be closed tactically once contact is made. This has lasting implications beyond 1991. Armored forces around the world study the Gulf War closely. Many reach the same conclusion. Survivability and situational awareness matter as much as firepower and mobility. Western tank designs increasingly emphasize sensor integration, crew protection, and networked command systems. Upgrades to existing fleets focus on thermal sights, stabilized weapons, and ammunition safety improvements rather than simply larger guns. The Iraqi experience also illustrates a more subtle lesson about doctrine rigidity. Systems are fielded to fight the last war unless deliberate effort is made to anticipate the next one. Iraqi armor doctrine is shaped by earlier regional conflicts where visibility was limited, engagement ranges were short, and mutual vulnerability was assumed. Against an adversary built to break those assumptions, bravery and skill can slow defeat but cannot reverse it. For the crew of the stranded Abrams, the engagement is recorded clinically. A recovery, a repair report, ammunition expenditure noted, enemy vehicles destroyed. There is no official narrative at the time framing it as extraordinary. Only later does the story gain symbolic weight, as analysts and historians look back to identify moments when the nature of armored combat visibly shifted. The image of a tank trapped in mud yet still dominant challenges intuitive ideas about warfare. Mobility remains critical, but it is no longer sufficient on its own. Control of information, the ability to see and act faster than the enemy, and survivability under direct fire have become equally decisive. In that sense, the engagement is less about a lucky stand and more about an inevitable outcome produced by system design and doctrine. What ultimately explains why Iraqi forces failed to destroy a lone Abrams trapped in mud is not chance, weather, or individual error. It is the convergence of doctrine and technology moving at different speeds. One side entered the engagement believing that immobilization equaled vulnerability, that proximity guaranteed lethality, and that armor battles were contests of courage and firepower measured in meters. The other side operated under a different assumption entirely, that a tank is not merely a vehicle, but a combat system designed to function even when circumstances strip away ideal conditions. The Abrams did not win because it was invincible. It won because it was built and crewed to survive first contact, process information faster than its opponent, and deliver decisive fire before the enemy could adapt. Its armor absorbed punishment long enough for sensors and fire control to do their work. Its doctrine accepted friction as normal and trained crews accordingly. In that sense, the mud did not negate American advantages. It removed distractions and exposed the underlying imbalance with brutal clarity. For Iraq's armored forces, the encounter reflected a broader strategic problem faced by many militaries at the end of the Cold War. Equipment optimized for one era was suddenly confronted by systems that compressed detection, decision, and destruction into a near-continuous action. Once that gap appeared, it could not be bridged in the middle of a firefight. No tactical adjustment could compensate for the inability to see, survive, and respond within the same time frame. The lesson endures beyond Desert Storm. Modern warfare continues to reward forces that invest in situational awareness, crew survivability, and doctrinal flexibility. Mobility still matters, but it is no longer the sole arbiter of victory. A force that can fight effectively while stationary, degraded, or outnumbered holds a decisive advantage over one that cannot. The story of the Abrams in the mud is remembered not because it was dramatic, but because it was revealing. It showed, in a single compressed engagement, how armored warfare had changed. If you found this kind of deep, grounded analysis valuable, consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps bring more documented, serious military history like this to the surface.